Coming up next, the Bookening continues to discuss teaching literature, this time good audio quality. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Bookening. My name is Nathan Albertson. I am your humble and obedient host, H&OH.
The H&OH
The H
himself.
and OH himself. Sounds like some kind of a housing committee.
The notorious H&OH.
The notorious, or a rapper. The notorious H and OH. And you, of course, are the... What's the opposite of notorious?
If you're not notorious and you have a good reputation, so the reputable.
The reputable...
The reputable.
The reputable scholar who's a baller of reading.
Bringing it in the house, man.
Yes, bringing it in his house. Of course, it's Brandon Chastain.
Cheerios, Pop-Tarts, Toaster Strudels.
Cheerios, Pop-Tarts, and Toaster Strudels. The three food groups.
Yeah, as far as like if you had to save 3 breakfast foods that are grain-based, what would they be, Nathan?
Toast?
Toast, okay. Butter on that toast or just toast?
Well, do I have to save butter?
No.
I'm only saving, like, breakfast foods are being obliterated. So anything that can be used outside of breakfast is staying.
Yeah.
If I'm understanding this
That's correct.
correctly. So butter has wide application and therefore is not being obliterated. Or is this alien race that's destroying all breakfast things, destroying anything that sort of has its tendrils in breakfast? So even though butter has other applications, it's destroying butter.
So it's not destroying eggs, but it is destroying the concept of scrambled eggs, fried eggs, things like that. But this is only grain-based at this point. So they haven't become that cruel. We'll save that for the next episode.
It's a very specific attack on the American people.
This is a great start to an episode.
Solid gold. If I had to save 3 grain-based breakfast foods, toast.
Okay.
Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Okay. Good choice so far.
One other grain-based bourbon for my breakfast.
I mean, that's what you're eating and drinking right now.
Yeah, we are recording a rare morning podcast right now, folks.
I do know that Nathan usually puts bourbon in his Cinnamon Toast Crunch instead of milk.
Well, Brandon, what about you? Obviously, you were setting me up because you wanted me to ask you this question. So what?
No, I don't want to answer.
You're not going to answer?
No, I'm not going to answer.
Wow. I have to ask you to turn in your podcasting badge, your podcasting gun.
All right. Here it is.
your sound effects badge.
Yeah. My keys.
The keys to your car.
Yeah. Oh, it is a podcast car, right?
Your bank account number.
Yeah. Here, I'm giving you my bank account number.
There you go.
There.
If people out there can hear different keystrokes and they know what they sound like, and let's be clear, every key sounds different on a keyboard.
It does.
Then they know your bank account number.
Yep, especially when you use a keyboard that's like the Casio keyboards that used to make a different sound effect every key you pressed. Yeah, I find it hilarious. So that's what my computer is. It does that every time I type. Drives everybody else crazy.
Yeah, but you find it hilarious.
I laugh all day long because I do a lot of typing.
When you sit down to write your poetry and stuff, it's just boing, dong.
Yep.
Well, folks, first of all, I'd like to say you're welcome for everything that came before.
Hey, you should be thankful.
Hey! Wow, the Fonz is here.
Hey!
We're in good moods today, aren't we, Brandon?
We're in great moods. We don't need Jake to add a sense of levity to this podcast.
All right, listen, folks. Me and Brandon have so much that we need to accomplish before Jake joins us again. And Jake has not left the podcast. He's coming back. He's going to be here for 1984 and for the Halloween stories.
Just calm down.
But there's a couple episodes that me and Brandon need to get done before that.
Like 3 episodes.
Yeah, I think it might end up being.
Because today's different than what people are expecting.
Right. So we're not actually getting back to semiotics, which is what we were really excited to talk about.
We have people who responded pretty well to those episodes.
Yeah, people were excited about that. I want to get back to that, and it's not actually semiotics, although I do want to talk about
In fact, I think somebody shouted out on Twitter that they really enjoyed that episode, right?
Yeah. People really like. So somebody said they listened to it twice. So
whoa,
that was nice.
I hope I was right in all my facts.
Twice is nice. Well, we'll be back with more of that. But we also got a pretty nice response to our teaching literature, our very impromptu sitting outside recording on bad technology episode where we were talking about teaching last week. And so I wanted to actually do a follow-up to that because what we ended up doing is just talking teaching theory in general, like how do you be a good teacher? How do you have classroom control?
And now we're going to go talk about each of my students.
Now we're going to talk about each of your students. So tell me about Adam Ferguson.
Yeah, well, that guy's a jerk.
Yeah, no. We all know he's going nowhere fast.
That's right.
It's a good thing that the janitor industry needs people.
Yeah.
You think Ferguson can even be up to that level, though?
No, I think it's going to be more like a grocery store. He can't stop himself from doing a run-on sentence. Mm-hmm. So at least he can be somewhere where they have run-on cells on things, right?
Ferguson wouldn't have to work a day in his life if he said things like that, because those things are gold.
That's right. Comedy clubs may be closed, but the Bookening is still open.
Yep. So if you're tired of comedy, you can come here.
And learn to just be okay with the fact that you no longer have it in your life.
Yeah, that's exactly right. By reading great literature. No, I don't want to talk about Adam Ferguson. He's a great guy. And, if he lives past 33, we'll be happy.
We will.
Anyway, folks, you're welcome for everything that's come so far. What can I say except you're welcome?
Da 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 da.
Da, 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 da. You're welcome.
Da, 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 da. You're welcome.
You're welcome. Right. Da, 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 da. We talked a lot about teaching, and I called the episode Teaching Literature, but then it occurred to me we didn't talk that much about actually the art of teaching literature.
Oh.
So
you're kind of right. Yeah. We more did our broad philosophical take on this.
Yeah, we talked about teaching, we talked about classroom control, we talked about things like that. My first question for you, Brandon, I think last week you said you start with the basics when you're teaching, plot, character, theme, whatever. Can you talk more about that? Like, what are the basics? What is it that you want a student to know about literature, or what are you actually trying to inculcate in them?
Yeah. Part of the broader goal is to teach students the art of analysis, which analysis, broadly speaking, is just the ability to take something, look at its parts, and explain and interpret them. Mm-hmm. So first, you want to have them learn the skill of identifying what's worth talking about. And then you also want to teach them the skill of interpreting what they've seen. And those are two very difficult things to actually teach a student to do. Once they've mastered those skills, actually, then they can write an essay decently, but they can't do essay writing without it. We always try to, so teachers think that you can teach the craft of writing an essay before you've taught them how to think in the first place, which is really difficult because essay writing is the art of thinking about something. And so, for example, even personal essays like E.B. White's Once Again to the Lake, that's still him analyzing and interpreting details from his past about this lake that he would go and visit.
Right, even like a David Sedaris essay, for example. Yeah. It's him organizing and bringing a point of view to his life, and it doesn't happen without those analytical tools.
Yeah, and it's identifying, and so that really is, broadly speaking, what you're trying to help students do as far as analysis. And then you also want to teach them the art of appreciating what's beautiful and good. If we want to go the classical education route, but still classical terminology route, but still that is a useful way to think about it. So those two things, you want them to be able to analyze something and interpret it, because those skills, like I tell my students all the time, are broadly applicable to other subjects as well. Right. Like if they learn how to look at details and interpret them in literature, they can apply that to history, they can apply that to government, they can apply that to science, all these things that are asking them to have that same skill of analysis.
I think they can apply it. This may be overstating the case slightly. Lord willing, as they grow in wisdom and discernment, they can apply it to larger life issues. With
debates surrounding things that are happening right now in our world, we're seeing that applicability. With just a little analysis versus rhetoric, you can sway yourself very different ways.
Right. But even things like, I think as you develop these muscles, it even helps with things like choosing your friends or choosing a church or, you know, the general kinds of life decisions that you have to, choosing a wife, choosing a husband. I don't want to pretend like classical education or these analytical tools are going to be the salvation of your soul, but being able to identify things, pattern recognition, like, you know, oh, this is a Wickham.
Yep.
I know Wickhams. This is what they look like. I'm going to stay away from this man. I'm going to be attracted to this man. These are tools that grow as we think and as we discern and as we practice.
Exactly, and that's the word, discern. And so as you combine the analysis and the appreciation of what's good into one thing, that's teaching them the art of discernment, right? Discerning what they should devote their time to. That's really what you're trying to do, and help them as a teacher. Hopefully it's happening at home too, but you can't always count on that.
Right.
So anyways,
do you find that, I don't want you to throw your class or your school or anything under the bus, but do you find, generally speaking, in your life that you can count on it happening to some degree at home, or is it really just a crapshoot? Like,
just depends on the family. Yep.
Yeah.
Not in general, you can't, no. And you'd be surprised at those that you can count on and those you can't. And a lot of the times, the students who are more successful are the ones that you know you can count on it. So anyways, but it does depend on the student too, the willingness that they have to give to the work. So, but yeah, as far as teaching, then analysis. So let's start there. What you want to do is, depending on where you're getting your students, but in any case, you want to know what tools do you want them to have at the very beginning of class in which to analyze what you're looking at. And so that's where the things like character. And, you know, you give them the subtypes. Is this a static character? Is this the protagonist, antagonist? Make sure that they really understand those definitions, because definitional work is very essential to good thinking. You see a lot of fuzziness and just bad logic in general coming from just a lack of definitions. It's like the basic rule. Define your terms, and it's very helpful. That's something that's also very useful to apply to your life, because again, with the recent things that have been happening, you often see it's a matter of dishonest definitions.
But Brandon, literature is meant to be enjoyed and tasted and felt. You're going to bring all these, you're going to dissect the frog and kill it, to steal E.B. White's analogy.
Yeah, you can dissect it. I'm not sure that kills it, though, because often it actually increases your appreciation of something when you see how well it's working. So in other words, you have a beautiful clock in front of you, and you can appreciate it aesthetically for being a beautiful clock. But then also it's pretty amazing then to go and see all the ways that the craftsmen, the work that they had to put into it to make the clock work.
Right.
So you can both appreciate that on a logical level and then still step back and appreciate on an aesthetic level too. Play that balance as a teacher.
Well, I think people also mistake, especially students, like when I was a lazy student, you mistake the means with the end. You mistake the process with the finished result. What I mean by that is you assume because it's difficult or boring to learn these analytic tools that it will be difficult and boring to apply them. You know, like, oh, I have to go through and decide who the dynamic characters and who the static characters are in Pride and Prejudice. That's not fun. But actually what you want is for those things to just be second nature. It's why we actually don't talk a lot about those kinds of things on the show, The Bookening, because we're assuming that for us, they're second nature. And for a lot of people that listen, they're going to be second nature. And so we fill in the gaps where we feel like we need to. But it's like you want to bring all that stuff to bear instantly, which takes work and growth and learning the tools. But once you have them, it's not like you're going to be sitting there bored dissecting the frog. You're just going to look at the frog and see all kinds of beauty in the frog that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. You've been programmed to have like the insta analysis.
The insta feeling and insta analysis. And so even artists understand that. I mean, I guarantee you take any of your favorite movies and there was lots of work at the drawing board for that story, or the storyboard, that's what they call it, right?
Right.
Just deciding exactly how the story is going to work and deciding, okay, we need an antagonist. We need a dynamic character here. We need a static character here, and weighing back and forth why they needed those sorts of things. And then it's the instantaneous, the movement of it that really moves you as art, but still that work goes behind it. And so that one of my favorite lines that I tell like students who are trying to learn to write actual poetry and stuff is that, you know, the Yeats line, a line may take us hours perhaps, and yet if it does not seem a moment's thought, our stitchings and unstitchings have been not. Like anybody who's tried to write knows that that's true, because what you usually produce the first time isn't the best. And so you have to go back and work and develop that more. That means even the artists think of their work that way, in other words. You have to think about, okay, so why did he choose this word in this poem? Anyways, but having those tools of analysis for whatever you're looking at really helps the students find things to say about it. So with character, plot, setting, mood and tone, those can be difficult things to talk about, but you still want to look at them. Images, symbols, the basic categories of literature, style. And then you have those, and then you can ask them questions like, okay, today we're going to analyze this character. Today we're going to look at the author's tone, and we're going to see what we can find to say about it. Of course, within each category, depending on the skill of your class, you have sub-definitions.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to throw them all at the same time. You might throw the broader categories at them at once, and then have days or weeks where you're developing each one. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
So like with style, that's when you get into rhetoric. That's when you can introduce the broad, like ethos, pathos, logos, logos. It's fun that I looked those words up with my students in my rhetoric class last year and found out that most of us mispronounce those and nobody really says them the same.
So what's right?
I've always said ethos, but apparently it's ethos. It's pathos.
Not pathos.
Not pathos. According to what we looked up, but I've always said pathos. So I don't know. Maybe somebody out there who...
I think I would say ethos. I don't know. No, I'm not going to be able to recreate what I would say off the top of my head.
But we all know what we're talking about when we say them.
Yep.
And then you give them the other rhetorical categories, and with style, you can talk about the complexities of metaphor, the metonymy, synecdoche, stuff like that, which means you need to have your terms memorized too.
Mm-hmm.
But so there is work that goes into that. But once they have those, then they can start looking at style and realizing, okay, this author's making this choice. Maybe they didn't make it intentionally, but still they used a metonymy here. Why did they do that? What's it doing for them? You're going to get some of that work with fiction, depending on what writer you're looking at. If you have a writer who's very stylized, then you'll get more useful discussions out of that. You'll just have to weigh, like Teaching to Kill a Mockingbird. You're going to get a lot more talking about narrative perspective and character than you are about style in that book. Because there's just not a whole lot to say about the style.
Right.
It's straightforward. It's straightforward, and it's good.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not going to get a whole lot of rhetorical complexity. Now, style in a Shakespeare sonnet, on the other hand, you're going to get a lot out of that, right?
Well, I also think style in a Harry Potter book, or Ready Player One, you can get a decent amount out of the carelessness and the moral ambiguities that a bad style introduces.
Yeah, and so you can get good discussions out of stuff like that. And so you just need to, you have those categories because it helps students not just feel like they are having a book club where they're just going to say whatever they feel, but they actually have real categories of things that they can go to. And you're guiding it. You're going to tell them, okay, today we're doing this. And you're going to use that to help discuss the craft of the book that day or the craft of the poem. And then just have those categories available. You're going to get a lot more work out of metaphor, imagery, and stuff with a poem than you are usually out of a story. Usually. I mean, we got a lot of work with the guillotine imagery in Tell It Two Cities with a class. But
sure.
And again, it just depends on that author. And you help them, which helps them realize not every author tells a story the same way. But having those categories, it helps anchor class in a discussion that you can probably develop for the hour that you have those students. It also gives the students a direction. It's not a useful way usually to just go into a class and say, okay, so you guys read these chapters, what do you think? Unless you're trying to get something, and then you're the kind of teacher that can then say, oh, that's an interesting comment, let's go with that. Eventually you have to give a direction to the discussion.
So when you walk into one of these classes, you said last time, you've spent your life preparing, but for any given class, you just walk in and do it. I think you said that. It's true, whether you said it or not. What do you have in your mind? Do you have, we're going to do this chunk of literature and we're going to look for this thing? What are the prompts that you have for yourself?
Well, usually you've had chapters or a story that you had them read or some poems. And so you go in and you might have something in mind. And you might even establish the goal for them that day, which I will usually do, especially with younger students. I'll say, here's what we're doing. We're going to look at these chapters. And, I want to examine Atticus Finch, and then I also want to look at Tom Robinson. Those are two of the broader goals, but we'll see how discussion goes. You might establish it that way.
And if when you say that, do you in your mind have an angle, like we're going to talk about static characters, or we're going to talk about this kind of metaphor?
Yeah.
Kind of what emerges in discussion?
A little bit of what emerges, because you want to let them, especially at the level of AP, help guide it some, because you're trying to get them to where they can say interesting things.
Right.
But you want to have some goals in mind in case you want to have something you want to say about Atticus Finch. And so I brought him up last week with my students, and I'm saying, so I will say something like, I want to talk about Atticus Finch as a character, and I want to talk largely about the complexity of how Harper Lee presents him, and also the theme of fatherhood that comes up through him that's just rampant throughout this story.
Right.
Those are my goals. And then I'll say, but let's see what you guys have as observations about Atticus.
What I find is having something like that, like, for example, with this podcast we're recording right now, I'll be a little meta. I had 10 questions that I wrote down yesterday just as I went about my day. I thought of 10 questions. I have no idea what they are. I'm not looking at them. I probably won't look at them because our conversation is going now and it's going fine. But it gives me confidence to lead the conversation right now because I know that they're there. Not because I have a goal in mind, but because I know that I could have a goal in mind if I needed to.
What you don't want to do, and you just have to know your teaching style, is if you're the kind that needs to have like a set plan in front of you, then you need to have that, because what you don't want is to just let the class go whatever direction without you leading it. You want to be able to step in at some point and say, okay, that's good for now on that. Maybe we'll come back to that later, but let's move on. Or you want to be able to kind of nurture that conversation and develop and grow it. But you have to have that sense about you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know how to say it really, but if you don't have that natural just ability to just kind of guide the conversation and know where you want it. And I don't know how to develop it. It's more like an instinct that some people have, but it doesn't mean you have to have it to be a teacher.
No, it just means you have to do more prep work.
Yeah, then you might have to do prep work, and that's fine, but you just need to know that about you, and that it is more work for you to teach, but that's fine.
Well, also, it just depends on where you're at in life. One of the reasons you're able to ad-lib a lot of this stuff is because, like I said earlier, you've spent your life preparing. Yeah. So you have a lot of handles and go-tos and things in your head that other people might not have, which is just, some people are going to have more, some people are going to have less, some people...
Yeah, and so that's where you want those categories, because they help you too.
Mm-hmm.
If you're getting clogged up in Atticus Finch and your students don't know where to go, you say, okay, well, let's look at the places where he appears, the settings that she has him in. Why do these places matter? You might say, okay, what broader themes come out through Atticus Finch? Why do those matter? You might say, how does she present him through his dialogue? Why does that matter? And stuff like that. And then, you'll begin to get some discussion out of that. And then if you're still spinning your wheels, be willing to move on.
Do you personally ever ask questions that you don't know the answer to, or go out on a limb exploring things?
Oh, yeah, all the time. And I'll tell the students things like that. I'll be like, I don't necessarily have an answer to this. We're just going to kind of develop this as we go. And if you're going to do that, be willing.
Do you get lost in the weeds sometimes? Like, does the branch fall when you...
Yeah, sometimes it will. You have to be okay with that. Just as long as students realize that you're in control of the conversation and you're letting them participate, but you're not just letting things go that you're not a direction you don't want it to go.
Right.
In other words, if you're intentional about things, then I think they're usually okay with that.
Right. You can intentionally fail or intentionally go out on a limb and everybody can be comfortable with it.
Especially if you're willing to step back and say, okay, guys, we didn't really get much out of that. But what you do see now is that what I keep telling you is that, I'm imagining talking to the students here. Mm-hmm. What I tell you guys is that part of the difficulty of coming up with a thesis statement is doing the thinking beforehand, where you can actually have an interesting, unobvious thesis statement, as opposed to just what's obvious and boring.
Right.
And so by going down that rabbit trail, we proved that that's not going to work, but at least we're doing the thinking necessary to get us to something interesting.
It's interesting doing that work as a teacher and being able to authoritatively go out on a limb and then authoritatively have the limb break.
Yeah.
There's a way, I think a lot of people make the mistake, I've certainly watched teachers, and as a teacher, I've done this before, of trying to pretend like the limb didn't break, trying to pretend like I knew we were going there all along, and actually I had a master plan, and it's great, and it's like kids smell the garbage.
Yeah, and that's where...
a million miles away. You can't get away with that. You have to cop to it. And then there's the opposite extreme is there's a weak way to cop to it that makes them feel like you were out of control and you didn't know what you were doing.
Yeah, I mean, if you step back and you get embarrassed and you start mumbling and stuff, then they're not going to trust you much.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, so
there's a way to though intentionally say, even if they ask you a question you don't know the answer to, there's just a way to handle that says, we're all in process and I'm the king of the process.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I'm the king of all knowledge and all reasoning. It just means I'm in charge of the process.
And you want them to feel that. And so that's even part of what we talked about last time with classroom management. You just want them to always feel like you're in control. You can have a fun classroom,
right,
but still be the one in charge.
Right. But kids love that when you are able to have the humility and guts and the right mix of everything to be able to process in real time when they see you figuring things out, that they can get really excited. That can be some of the most fun that kids have is watching.
Exactly. And you want to get excited by the points they make too, not just excited by the points you want to make. Like you want to show them that they're applying these skills that you've taught them of analysis and interpretation. Those are, so just as a step back really fast for teachers, those are two of the most important things you keep in mind is analysis is great, but then you also have to interpret it, right? And the question I always tell my students, the most important question of analysis is why. So you pointed out this really interesting fact. Now let's understand why that matters. Hopefully there's a teacher out there that finds that useful, that you want to teach them, here's analysis, especially for high school, here's interpretation, and the interpretive question is why.
Mary is a static character in Pride and Prejudice. We have established she does not change from the beginning to end. Why did Jane Austen do that?
And that's the only way you're going to get to a thesis statement. Students always find that to be the most challenging thing is how do I get to a thesis statement? Well, you have to ask yourself the question why. Because thesis statements in the end have to matter. They have to have an argument behind them. And so they have to demand evidence and proof. Good example of that was last year of the question we were talking about, going out on a limb. Here we have the end of To Kill a Mockingbird. What is Harper Lee actually trying to say? Like, what's going on with Atticus Finch and his refusal to see that it was Boo at the end? What's going on with the sheriff being the one that actually tells Atticus, we just need to lie about this?
There's a weird, sudden moral weakness.
Yeah, like what in the world's going on with this?
Rigidity on Atticus's part.
And I made the point, I said, guys, I don't actually have an answer. I want you guys to help me just look at the details and try to figure out what we think as a class, if we can come up with a thesis statement about what's happening here. And they actually did a good work on that. Their observation was, well, in the end, it's the sheriff representing the law. He's the one. So it's not, in other words, overturning authority there at the end of the story. It's actually having the authority realize that sometimes its authority has to adapt and change based on who is the one having the law come down on them. That's interesting enough. I don't know if it's true, but it's still interesting, and there's evidence there for it. Because it's not Atticus who sees it, it's the sheriff who's even above Atticus. Right? Atticus
is actually just saying we need to apply the law.
Yeah. But the guy who actually represents applying the law, which is the sheriff, is the one who's pushing. And so that's interesting. You're thinking about character. You're thinking about their position in the story. You're thinking about others in relation to them, because you have to think about relations within stories. And then you're also thinking about their dialogue, things like that. There's evidence to back it up. So,
you know what actually is really interesting that I just thought of? This is off the point of teaching literature and onto the point of To Kill a Mockingbird. She removes a certain kind of icky moral culpability from Atticus by not having him do that. If you wrote the scene so that the sheriff was the guy that was like the authoritarian, just wants to apply the law across the board, and then Atticus talks him into not, you wouldn't know how to feel about Atticus in that moment and whether he was doing the right thing.
Yeah.
It's actually the only way to write the scene.
Yeah. No, it was brilliant. It's brilliant. Yeah. It's well done.
The scene doesn't work the other way.
No, it doesn't. And it matters that it's the sheriff doing it too. So yeah, a lot of the ways she chooses to tell that scene matter. And so that's kind of what you're trying to help students see.
Right,
we're interpreting that through the details. And then as far as then appreciation, once you've looked at all the things like that, then you can also take a step back and you want to occasionally have moments where you just will read things and you'll acknowledge the feeling that's coming out in them. So there's the Boo Radley scene, where Scout is remembering Boo, or thinking about Boo and him sitting on his porch and all the things that he observed. That's a pretty moving scene. You want to take the details and also interpretation, like when you're talking about his fatherhood compared to Mayella's father, those things. You can get a lot of emotion out of that too, and help them appreciate the broader things that are happening in the story. So I guess what I'm trying to say there is, as far as then moving away from just the vivisection of the story to actually appreciating it, they'll appreciate it if they see you appreciating it. And if you're helping them see what they should be appreciating.
So Brandon's job in this moment in the classroom is to communicate appreciation for To Kill a Mockingbird. What exactly does that look like? I mean, is it just you going, "Oh man, isn't this sad? Isn't this what?" Like, what do you do? What are the tools to communicate appreciation?
Well, one, you can communicate it by just appreciating the way the story is told, and then kind of in your tone of voice and your enthusiasm for it. But also then taking those interpretations and then just applying them to them, like, talking about why this matters to them and what sort of relationship this has to them. Like, all of them have fathers, all of them have homes where there's things like that, this matters for them. They should feel this. And then also just occasionally, if you think something's beautiful, just stopping and saying, hey, that's just absolutely beautiful.
Mhm.
Like, if I'm reading poetry with them sometimes, I'll do that. And then I might point out why it is. Sometimes I might just let it linger.
Right.
But having those, so there's just a variety of tools. You can either develop it to help it obvious why it applies to them, or you can just, like you said, sometimes just literally just say, man, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I think this is what I was getting at, what we were getting at last week. I said something last week that I didn't feel like I articulated very well, which is the idea of making associations. And I think associations are very helpful for appreciation. The more threads you can tie together in terms of how does this relate to someone's life? How does this relate to a movie that we all like? How does this relate to culture? How does this relate to pop culture? How does this relate to your mommy issues, to your daddy issues? How did this, you talked about your professor telling a story of being under the stars with his wife or something like that. Something that was very moving and meaningful to him that he tied it to.
Yep.
And suddenly it became moving and meaningful to you.
Yep.
Simply because he gave an analogy from his life that.
Yeah. And then actually, that is one of the best ways to do it. So when you're reading poetry or reading To Kill a Mockingbird, you'll just stop and you'll say things like, I mean, how many of you guys can sympathize with what's happening here? You have things in your life, and you might tell a story, something like that, but you really want them to see how literature, how it works, and why, through sympathy and empathy, all those things, why literature works as art, aesthetically as it does. So
right.
There's just the pleasure of beautiful words too, like with poetry. But also then you'll get, like, the reason a sonnet works is because everybody can imagine saying that sonnet to their beloved.
Right. And you have to bring it down to earth. And the way that you bring it down to earth is to say, well, this is a story of when I was dating my wife and I felt like she was fairer than a summer day,
or the Langston Hughes poem that I love, the Come Let Us Roam the Nights Together Singing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And even if your wife isn't going to appreciate it, it still makes you feel.
All right, folks, here's an association for you.
Yeah.
I asked my wife to marry me and she said yes. And I texted Brandon and said, we're engaged. And Brandon said, you should read her some poetry. And then he texted, I said, what should I read her? And he said, read her that Langston Hughes poem. So I did. To
crickets,
to no acclaim, to no love,
more
to
Langston
no,
Hughes.
yeah, more like Langston booze from Meredith. And, so I broke off the engagement and
Nathan's now single.
Single. Yeah. No, I married her anyway. She's pretty cute, even if she doesn't like Langston Hughes. And something that Brandon is actually really good at, you'll notice in the Bookening, I've done this with Brandon for now 5 years, is he ties things to movies and pop culture. Just you remember that rap song or that movie? You can say that's gauche. You can say that's not what a truly great literature would do, but it always really helps me. Like, oh yeah, this highfalutin thing and this highfalutin piece of literature is actually just like the thing that the Marvel guys did.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I'm sorry, but most of us aren't that much smarter than that.
And I mean, in the end, this is one of our soapboxes on the Bookening, but the things we think of as high literature didn't start off as high literature in the first place. We didn't really have that category, and we'll talk more about it when we get into Lit Crit.
Right, which is next week.
But like the way that we think about T.S. Eliot and Ernest Hemingway, they kind of created that ivory tower pristineness for themselves. Before that, I mean, it was Dickens with his hands dirty and just storytelling and just having a good time, and Shakespeare. Nobody thought of Shakespeare that way. Nobody thought of Dickens that way. So, I mean, it's just...
I've been reading Middlemarch, which is a giant tome of a novel. It's kind of difficult by today's standards, but you can tell a lot of what actually makes it difficult is George Eliot's desire to entertain, because she'll be like, I'm going to do a parody of this thing about provincial life in this chapter, and it's going to be 40 pages. And then I'm going to write an auction scene, not because it matters to the plot, but because I think people will laugh at this.
Yeah.
And so that it's so full of incident and full of stuff, it becomes kind of overwhelming and challenging now. But I think all that stuff is basically there because George Eliot's showing off and trying to...
Just trying to entertain.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit more about inculcating love, particularly of style. We've had people ask us over the years, like, you guys said that this book had good style, this book had bad style. I just don't hear it. I just don't see it. I just don't care. Functionally, it doesn't matter to my understanding of the story. And Brandon has a sneer on his face, folks. You should see this. He doesn't. But people do feel that way. Kids do feel that way. How do you make someone understand music? I mean, how do you How do you get that into somebody?
Well, I know the way that Dr. Fairchild did it for me was just by reading it and showing you how much he loved it, and then pointing out ways that it works and why it's working the way it does. So again, it's that balance of analysis versus just appreciating it. And so just based on his love of things, now I have deep love of certain styles of poetry just that come from him. Mm-hmm. And you have to own that responsibility, because I have students now, I've heard from parents who say like their students now have tastes that were definitely shaped by my literature class, where they're like there was a discussion about Hawthorne that came up, and one of the students said, "Oh, I can't believe that you like Hawthorne," or something like that. Yeah, that's me for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I stand by it. But
not making snobs out of your students is another topic, I guess.
Well, and students are going to have to balance that themselves, because you still have to be able to make judgment claims. And so I remember the discussion that came up, and it was just like, okay, here's Hawthorne versus let's take Melville. The difference in their style is Melville can be purple, but really he's just more stately and clean with his style in a way that Hawthorne's very purple and bringing in unnecessary just words and feelings and adjectives and things that don't really add to it.
There's just a lot of ornamentation.
That really gets in the way. Mm-hmm. And that was the discussion we had. And so I'm like, yeah. So do I like Hawthorne as a stylist? Not really, right? I think that I wish that he was better.
Yeah.
And so
small doses, is my opinion on that.
But you point out, you look at the style and you just look at a sentence or a paragraph and maybe compare it to something else you've read. Like you've read Hemingway, and it's unfair to compare Hawthorne to Hemingway, sure. But you still look at him and you say, okay, Hemingway's clean, sometimes to a fault, but usually not to a fault.
Right.
Usually not. But here's Hawthorne. Let's look at the difference. Oh yeah. Hawthorne's using all these words that are complicated and aren't really adding to the story and are just kind of digressions. And then that's what then you'd help them understand, what do we mean by purple prose, stuff like that. Things that are just more directed at getting you to feel a certain way as opposed to adding to the story, right?
Right.
And you're like, well, that's not always bad, but you see how Hawthorne's doing it here, how this is unnecessary. What would happen if we cut some of that stuff out?
Right.
And so you just look at the literal words and things that are being used and apply the rules of grammar and analysis to them. And
well, I think a lot of it is about doing all that by removing the notion of inevitability from people's heads. Everybody, a kid just comes to a text like to be or not to be. And it's just there. It's an artifact. It feels like a thing that's stood for hundreds of years. It in fact has stood for hundreds of years. But if you start to just ask a simple question like, well, he could have said to be or not, it's like E.B. White in his little essay at the end of Elements of Style, talking about these are the times that try men's souls. And then he says, let's look at the alternatives. These are trying times, soul-wise. He just writes these are times that are trying to souls of men. He writes all the alternatives, and suddenly the good one stands out simply because you see it wasn't inevitable. He had to reject 20 alternate versions. And
so helping them see that, helping them understand that we're very image and picture driven, even with language. Mm-hmm. And so those sorts of images really matter. One of the reasons C.S. Lewis is such a master of the essay is he knows, and E.B. White too, is they know the little images that are going to move you. Mm-hmm. In The Way to Glory, the mud pies and sandcastles image, or as surely as the tide, the boats are lifted by the tide, or whatever he says there. And, E.B. White with the images that you get from many of his essays. But then also that we're very musically driven too, that rhythms and pulses matter. Mm-hmm. It's really fascinating to study that. Like one of the reasons, circadian rhythms, but the beat of the heart, the beat of your blood in your ear, all these things, they just really affect the way we see the world. Mm-hmm. And so that pulse and rhythm and language matters. Every language has rhythm and pulse. I don't know why I'm saying rhythm and pulse as though they're different. Every language,
rhythm and pulse, rhythm and pulse.
Every language has a pulse. It has a heartbeat. And so being intentional about that matters. And we like the authors who give ear to that. So, and so helping them see that. And then, you can talk about anapaests and ioms and stuff like that with the way that the rhythms that come into language and help them take that apart. But then in the end, they're only going to really appreciate it if you read it for them in a way that shows them how to appreciate it. Mm-hmm. You'd have to take the fact that you're the teacher, and if you feel weak in something, go and educate yourself. So, for example, I'm teaching a little bit of history this year. So one of the things I did was as I've been working and driving, I've listened to a book on the Middle Ages on tape, and it was really fun. But it's something that I needed to do. And I wasn't taking any time out of my day because I was just listening as I did things.
Yeah, it kind of feels like, I mean, I know people have different jobs and different life situations, but in between Google and Wikipedia and Audible and Hoopla and all that stuff, there's so many resources. You carry the world's information in your pocket. You don't really have an excuse not to brush up on certain things.
Yeah, and as a teacher, hopefully you're a teacher because you also yourself are curious and want to develop in knowledge, and your students will help you, and you need to be, I think what you said earlier about having some humility in the classroom, you need to be aware, when you've said something wrong and know how to handle that and step back from it and not let it ruin you.
But how do you do that?
Well, for one, if you've had it, you'll either say, oh man, like I didn't mean to say that. Sorry guys, this is what I meant. But you have to own it. Like you said, the students are going to be aware of, they know you're a human and they're okay with the fact that you're going to make a mistake here and there if you at least own it. Like my son has had a teacher who was unwilling to do that. Right. And they know, right. They say things all the time that are wrong and they're just try to stand by them or something like that. Or Jake's famous story about the banana, right?
Banana. Yeah.
So just have some humility about yourself. And if you accidentally say, I'm trying to remember what it was last year. There was some word that I misused and was just continually misused it throughout a class because I just wasn't paying attention. And then one student raised her hand and said, that word, I think it doesn't mean what you think it means, basically. I'm like,
I think it's plot, not float.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, wow, you're actually right. Thank you. And then you're like, oh, well, you just make a little joke about it and move on. And they're going to not care. But if you if you just turn red and just start sweating and crying or something, right. Or if you get mad, like, how dare you?
Right.
So
yeah, that's been a difficult lesson for me. I mean, I am essentially an autodidact, which means I'm incredibly insecure about everything that I know. And so, even though I did just say the sentence, I am essentially an autodidact. Are you there?
Well, I am essentially Superman with my brain.
I don't know why anyone would need to be insecure who said a sentence like that. But actually, I think someone who says a sentence like that needs to be very insecure. But I've had to learn to just own my mistakes because your students, they'll eat you alive if you don't, if you try and pretend, or if you just get flustered and red-faced. It's like, no, we're all human. We all make mistakes. We all have verbal slip-ups where we say, I mean, what is the famous Bible? What is it called? The Bible where they misprinted it and said, "Thou shalt adultery," or
the
something
Devil's
like
Bible,
the
right?
Devil's
or something.
Bible, yeah. It's like things like that happen. You will. All the most famous parts that have been cut out of the Bookening that you've never heard has been parts where someone's accidentally made it sound like fornication's great, or the villain is the good guy, or
so yeah. And then I think it frees the students up to realize that when they make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. Like you don't want to belittle them unless you have a particular goal with belittling them.
Yeah,
it depends on the student. In other words, but still, it helps them to realize that thinking and analyzing things, it's a process of making mistakes.
Yeah.
So
that's basically a definition.
Yeah. So that's one way to do it. Yep. So
do you feel, this is kind of a weird, maybe philosophical question. Do you think that your job as a teacher is essentially to elevate the kids, or to, what's the opposite of elevate?
To destroy them.
Yeah. Brendan, do you think that the job of a teacher is to elevate the kids or to destroy them? Are you bringing the material down, or are you bringing the kids up?
Oh, yeah. I always want to bring the kids up. I don't usually.
I guess that's obvious, but.
No, but so for example, one thing I don't do in my classrooms is try to make the students feel that they're smarter than they are. Usually I have the opposite goal early in the semester. So like the way that I've approached AP Lit so far is I'll come in and I just, for one, it helps establish your authority. If you can do this, you start with the Greeks and you just move all the way through literary history. It usually takes about 2 school days. And you say, okay, I want to see how much you guys know. And then you just go piece by piece and they begin to realize that they don't know that much. And it kind of de-elevates them because it helps, realize that they need to realize that there's a lot they need to learn and that there's a process. And then you say, okay, we know now what you don't know. That's great. Knowing what you don't know is part of the challenge. Now let's start filling the gaps. And then you have a process. So like, for example, I assign each of them a Friday where they have to give a presentation on a period of history, literary history.
Nice.
And that helps start to develop their knowledge like that. And then they have to take notes and respond to their fellow presenters on those days. Yes, you do want to bring them down only to show them where you're headed, right? And so you say, here's the goal. And so last year, it became a mantra of our class that the goal was to get them to level 0. So in other words, you guys are at level 10 right now. We're going to get to level 0. And they really latched onto that. Like, let's go, let's do it. And so as long as they realize that there's a reason they should be elevated. There's a reason that they should want that goal. And then you're going to get them there. You don't want to then kick them and say, okay, that's what you don't know. And you're too stupid to know it now. You dumb idiots. You'll never be what I am.
Do you believe that there's kids who are just math kids? I mean, are there people that just don't have an ear for literature, just aren't not going to care? They need to get a C in the class, but besides that, you love them and you respect them, but there's no hope for them?
No, I think that there are math kids, but I think that they can still be taught to love literature. And I've actually had students who have said to their parents that, well, I'd never really liked literature until now. That I didn't like books or appreciate literature, but now I kind of do. I never thought I'd like to read. I think that there's always that hope for students, for them to at least appreciate it. I don't think that there's, outside of rare cases, and often it's just stubbornness, that's actually true. I do think there are people that are gifted different ways, but I still think that they can be taught to appreciate what it is that's good about poetry.
What do you do in terms of developing the kids who are gifted?
You set standards for them, and you expect them to help lead discussion in class, and you have higher goals for them in their writing and stuff like that. And you really encourage them when they say something good to continue. There are responsibilities and weights that you can give to students within a classroom just by, if you look at them or if you call on them, that they know that you're expecting more of that student. And yeah, there's a bit of hierarchy in the classroom, but that's fine. I think the students who usually don't want to talk are fine with that in the first place. So, and you also have to know how to silence the students that often want to talk even when they don't have anything to say, which is just a balancing act. And so, do you read in the classroom? We would read some. I would often find that we would read more poetry than anything, because just learning poetry is often meant to be read out loud. And that's helpful. That's another way to help have them learn appreciation, is just by reading poetry with them. Because poetry really is a dead art, and it has died in many ways. Even those who call themselves poets today aren't necessarily poets. So they're just prose writers with broken syntax. I don't know. So
just prose writers with broken syntax. Take that, Rupi Kaur and Maya Angelou.
And then I guess, the last thing is, a part of application to their life is you do want to be pushing towards discernment and teaching them that. And so even with being careful with how you approach a book, what you read in the classroom, if you do read something that's a bit dicey, you have a purpose behind it. So we read Banana Fish. It's a Good Day for Banana Fish by Salinger.
Yeah.
There's some stuff that's on the edge. Even with To Kill a Mockingbird, there's some stuff that's on the edge.
Right.
And just guiding them through that carefully, because the end goal really is, with literature, to teach them to be more discerning in their lives. Pushing them, especially with today's kids, to understand that what you consume as art can affect you.
Yep. We say it on the Bookening all the time, but everybody assumes they can just take this stuff in and it won't affect them. And it's insane.
And so you have to have that as a broader vision and goal for yourself as a teacher as well.
How do you deal with the fact that most literature is above students' heads? I mean, in other words, if you're a high school student, certainly a high school student in a dopey Christian school, not that there's such a thing as a dopey Christian school, most of the life experience that these great novels and poems are talking about is actually ahead of them. I mean, maybe Romeo and Juliet they can get because they've been in puppy love, but they're not going to understand Anna Karenina. They're not. I'm thinking of myself here because I read so many of these, but I think both of us were prodigious readers and autodidacts in high school, and it's you end up reading
things that are way above you.
I read Crime and Punishment when I was about 14, and it's what did I get out of that besides there was some crime and eventually some punishment?
You have to find the things that you can talk to them about that do resonate with who they are, and then you also have to help them appreciate the things that are beyond their experience too. One way you do that is just tell them, literature. So I read that section by Lewis from, I forget which, I think it might be The Discarded Image, where he talks about, one of the reasons we read literature is because it gives us windows to other places. It gives us experiences that we don't have.
Right.
And so you tell them that, this will be alien to you guys, but this is part of the reason we read these things and that's part of the reason discernment matters is because it shouldn't matter what you're giving yourself access to as far as a new experience. That's why you don't read porn. Acknowledging that, teaching them that, and then also finding those places that will mean something to them. And then that's why you do want to open up for discussion. What are they finding interesting? And then also, again, like I said, having that goal from the beginning with your class that you have expectations that are beyond them, but they can get there. And so if they know that, then they'll realize, like when we read Barn Burning by Faulkner, the style is usually gets in the way of immediate understanding. But if you go through a paragraph slowly with them and you say, this is how it's working. Right, this is the mind of a little boy mixed with this weird King James theatricality of William Faulkner. But that's how his style works. And then you show them how that works, and then they usually can engage more with the story too. So in other words, you understand that there are limitations to their appreciation, and you try to find out what those are and then help them take baby steps towards overcoming it.
Do you find, this is another kind of random question, do you find that you end up teaching material that you don't like, novels that you think aren't as good? And if so, how do you handle that?
Yeah, depending on where you're at, you're going to have to. And so like I had to read The Scarlet Letter with some students. I'm not crazy about Hawthorne, but...
You're not crazy about Hawthorne.
I'm not crazy about him, but you find ways to still do some of the same work. You'll find that you actually appreciate him more than you think.
My 2-sentence review of Scarlet Letter, just fine.
Yeah. And so, that's what it is. It's just fine. And you'll still find those ways to access it, like talking about character, talking about style, talking about image, that still give them stuff to do. But also take the opportunity to kind of share with them, as depending on who the class is, why you don't like it. So, like we had a discussion with a class last year, why I'm not overly crazy about Jane Eyre. And I did it intentionally with one student in mind. And it actually ended up being very helpful for her.
Are you running the danger there that you'll make them just despise the subject?
What if you're attacking what they love?
Well, if you're saying Jane Eyre's stupid, are they going to extrapolate from that this class is stupid? Like, in other words, we're reading one of the greats and the teacher's saying it's not that great. So where am I supposed to plant my feet?
Because then you want to make sure you point out to them why you're still reading it. Yeah, you're not, I wish we weren't reading this.
Right. I wish we weren't reading this.
And then they'd be like, well, then why are we reading this? Yeah, you're right. Instead, as everybody knows, I don't hate Jane Eyre. We like Jane Eyre quite a bit. Yeah. I was just pointing out, like towards the end, like why this story begins to fall apart with the love triangle there at the end. So that's more the discernment coming in.
And so you set Jane Eyre on fire, you threw it in the trash can, you got Wide Saragossa Sea or whatever that thing is called, said we're going to read this instead.
That's right. And
show us the true story of Mrs. Rochester, the first Mrs. Rochester.
And so that's what we did.
Good.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you're reading something in class that you just have no use or value for at all, I don't know why you would be doing that necessarily.
Yeah.
But if you do, you still have to have an angle. Like you have to convince the students there's a reason. So, yeah.
Yeah. And well, that's just one of the lines you got to walk teaching discernment. Part of teaching discernment is you got to be able to discern some bad stuff, which means you've got to take some bad stuff in. And where do you draw the line? Well, that's up to you, dear teacher, dear father, dear mother, dear pastor.
Yep.
All right, everybody, we're going to read 50 Shades of Grey.
Sweet.
Tell me why it's bad. Don't do that.
Yeah, no, I would not advise that.
You wouldn't advise that?
I would not advise reading 50 Shades of Grey or Twilight or anything like that.
Brennan just basically has them read Twilight books on the one hand and then like critical theory.
That's right.
Lukács, stuff like that.
We never read the book themselves. We only read like most obscure critics' take on them. So
the worst literature teacher I ever had, we walked in on him one day, quickly going through the cliff notes for Return of the King.
Hey.
J.R. Tolkien's Return of the King.
I mean, it's a long book.
It is. It is. It is a long book. Actually, we talked him into, he was a bad teacher. The movie, this will date me. The movie Return of the King was coming out this year. That was my last year of high school. So if you do the math, I graduated from high school 17 years ago, I guess. Although I didn't actually graduate. I dropped out and graduated later. But we said, hey, the movie's coming out, so we should read Return of the King. And he was like, okay, I guess that's fine. I'd rather be ogling the girls while they play volleyball anyway. He didn't actually say that, but that's what we all kind of thought. So we read Return of the King, and he didn't. Isn't that a beautiful story?
That's a wonderful story. That's a great teacher right there.
Yeah.
So as little work as you can possibly put into teaching, as little commitment to those students as you possibly can give, that is teaching.
And if you can give off some pervy vibes towards the students, then
even better.
The piece de resistance.
It's a perfect. It's a perfect.
Oh, man. If I had the choice between setting myself on fire and stuffing my arm down a garbage disposal or going back to high school.
Don't know what you'd do.
I think I'd go back to high school, but it'd be close.
I had a pretty good high school experience, so I'd go back to high school. But not all of us have the charmed educational life that Brandon has had.
Nope. Some of us are, say it with me, folks, essentially autodidacts. Oh, brother. I love Brandon, and I love our donors and our patrons.
Sweet.
So let's shout them out.
I will shout.
Brandon, why don't you say whether you think this person is
an autodidact?
An autodidact. What's the opposite? A didact? Is a didact just someone who's not autodidact?
I guess.
A manual didact?
Yeah, okay. I'll say auto or manual.
Oh, yeah, auto or manual.
But I'm thinking of cars now.
Right.
So
auto, manual, or electric.
Okay.
Not that those are the three categories of cars. To become a patron of the Bookening, go to patreon.com/the Bookening. I'd really love to get to King Arthur sometime soon, which when we get to $1,500 a month, we will do.
Are we done with Tolkien?
Yeah, we're basically done with Tolkien, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe we will. I don't know.
Who knows?
Maybe we'll.
We're done with Tolkien.
Yeah, I think we're done with Tolkien.
Forever. I only read the Cliff Notes anyways.
Yeah, maybe behind the paywall we'll talk about the Salmonarian and Farmer Giles of Ham. Maybe we could do just a little Tolkien roundup because that would be fun. But on the other hand, I think we were ready to
there
be
are
done
other
with
things.
Tolkien.
Yeah.
So patreon.com/the Bookening. We could use your support. I understand times are tough out there with the COVID and all of that. Things have slowed down a little bit on the fundraising side of things for everybody and for us. But so if you could support us right now, that'd be great. And you could get us to
$5 a month.
Yeah, $5 a month. Price of a cup of coffee a month.
Won't give you a shout out.
No, $10 a month. That's 2 cups of coffee a month that you won't buy. But just think about the things that.
But you get me telling you whether or not you're auto, manual, or electric.
Right. An electric didact. I guess that's like a robot.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's shout out our patrons. Once again, if you want to be part of this club or you want to support us in other ways, go to patreon.com/the Bookening. You want to see great behind the scenes videos. You want to get t-shirts, get books, get all kinds of things. Patreon.com/the Bookening. Robert and Rhonda, the Lovebirds, Brennan.
Manual.
The Artful Anthony Dodger.
Auto.
Little Anthony's Cigar Store.
Electric.
Absolutely electric. The Immortal Chelsea E.
Auto.
Jimmy Beam and Little Annie Oakley.
Manual.
Lily of the Valley.
Manual.
Andrew and Esther, the Lovebirds.
Manual.
The Keith Master.
Electric.
David's Moneyman Trucking.
Diesel.
John and Jill and Little Baby Max.
Manual.
Jay and Katie, who are cold and love cheese and also C.S. Lewis, including Till We Have Faces.
Auto.
Fairy Princess of Wonder and Happiness, Mother Beth.
Auto.
Consul Prime Adam.
Electric.
Jeremy the Dark Hooded Lord of Death.
Auto.
Nathan Not Me.
Auto.
Maya.
Manual.
Ryan the Red Avenger and Judith of the Ladies of Justice.
Electric.
Danny the Dude.
Manual.
DJ, that was a tough one. DJ Sammy G.
Electric.
Benny and Danny Tiberius.
Auto.
Eric and Catherine from Yon Window Breaks.
Auto.
Professor
Auto.
Lady X. Lavender's
Auto.
green, Dylan. Lavender's blue. Lavender's green, Dylan. I love you too. No Constrictor.
Ooh, electric.
Mare Cheap.
Electric.
The fair and fragrant maiden Chloe.
Manual.
Anthony, who's cold and hates life, liberty, and the pursuit of cheese.
Auto.
Jiu-Jitsu Jeffrey, the Texas Ranger.
Ooh, electric.
Rachel. Midnight Ninja Ellen.
Auto.
Queen Kongetta.
Manual.
Return of the Jedi.
Electric.
Jay of Rack and Ruin.
Electric.
Timothy the Rider at Dawn.
Manual.
Eric and Kate the Camp Champ Kings who are warm and love bees.
Auto.
Matty, man.
Auto.
Sweet Jamie Sunshine.
Ooh, electric.
Tyler, the Keeper of Eternal
Solar.
Darkness. And
Solar
Laura,
for her.
the Keeper of Eternal Light.
Electric.
Cold Steel Cody.
Aluminum. I don't know. Auto.
My favorite kind of didact. Yeah. I'm essentially an aluminum didact. It's kind of cool. That'd be a good name for a band.
Aluminum didact.
That's our band. Me and Brandon's new band.
Sweet.
Presenting aluminum didact. What kind of music? Imagine there's a lot of guitars.
Yeah.
An aluminum didact.
Yeah.
Where was I? Did I say Jacqueline the Librarian Barbarian?
I don't know. Manual.
John Bombadillo, Bomb Diggity, and Captain Tennille, his mate.
Manual.
Obviously. Saxophone, Alex.
Auto.
Saxophone oppression now. I drive great joy from making fun of Brandon's crappy saxophone impression.
Thank you, Nathan.
Sounded like a guitar. Eli the Scarlet Pilgrim.
Auto.
The other phone. Well, wow. Yeah, we'll just call him the other phone. The other saxophone, Alex, and dubstep Danny. Wow, I can't say that. The other saxophone, Alex, and dubstep Danny.
There it is. Auto.
Ryan, the Terror of Texas, and Eric of the Cream and Crimson, who are stuck in the cold. Please send cheese.
Auto.
That's it. Hey, thanks for listening, folks. Hope you enjoyed this. Bye. Patreon.com.
Bye.
/the Bookening.